So I want to start, as I will every one of these modules, with evidence of abundance, and dive into a few of these very quickly. So this is internet users as a percentage of the population. So this is 1990. We see the internet coming online in 1993 with Mosaic. And then look at this explosion around the world with, the United States leading, but other countries coming on very quickly. We're going to see in the next 5 years this effectively spike to 100% around the planet. This is bandwidth cost performance over the last 13 years. So this is a gigabit per second. Used to cost you $1,200. It's now $23. This is computing cost performance. So how many dollars a million transistors would cost? So in 1992, it was $222 for a million transistors. Today, it's 6 cents. Again, this stuff is invisible to us. We don't see it. We don't feel it. We effectively ignore it. We take it for granted when we get it. I want to help you visualize this because this is happening. And these changes are changing the way you should be thinking about business. This is storage cost. We saw that with the airplane full of magnetic memory. So a gigabit of memory in 1992 cost you $600, $569. Today, it's 3 cents. So how does that change industries where how you record stuff? Right? Effectively, I just came back when I was at Davos this last week. I gave 6 presentations, and just really I was there sort of mining information that I could bring back here to you. And one of the most effective mechanisms for storage that is coming online right now is actually DNA. So we're going to see the cost plummet a billionfold when you start storing in DNA. And we can talk more about that in a little bit. I love this. This should be on everybody's radar. Check this out. In 2000, to start a tech company, it cost you $5 million. Then in 2005, 500,000. Then the cloud and Amazon Web Services hits, and it drops down to 50,000. And then today, we're about $5,000. So we talk about an explosion in entrepreneurship, an explosion in competition, an explosion in opportunity. It's right here, the startup costs. And layer on top of this access to the world's information, access to massive computational power and capabilities. And so as more and more people start being able to start businesses, you have to think about, are they going to be my competition, or am I going to start backing them and partnering with them and working with them? Last year I talked about the asteroid hitting the dinosaurs 65 million years ago and wiping out the dinosaurs, and the furry mammals were the ones who came into existence. And remember the analogy, and I open up Bold. Can I borrow your copy of Bold 1 second? Thanks. Thank you very much. The cover here is a cover of an asteroid hitting the Earth. And the story that opens up here is the asteroid that's hitting the Earth right now, thanks, Fern, is Exponential Technologies. And the large companies unable to adapt are going to go the way of the dinosaurs. And my whole goal here, I spend the entire year looking at what are the coolest, most important technologies that you should be thinking about this year, going from deceptive to disruptive. And here's the final slide in this, actually next to final. This is the number of photographs taken. This red line is print film, and that blue line is digital, right? So it went from, when I was growing up, 3 to 10 billion photos a year being taken place, and now 350 billion. All of you have copies of this in your binder, and all of these will be, all this information I'm giving you is going to be on your portal. Again, I want you to share, and push this information out. And then finally, very importantly, something fundamentally changing the world. This is the adoption rate of technology. Hopefully this is not the first time you've seen it. But if you look at this, the telephone took about 110 years to get to 100% adoption rate. Clothes dryers took about 90 years. Air conditioning took about 70 years. The internet took about 20 years, and cell phones took about 10 years. you can look at the rate at which new technologies are becoming more and more adopted. So we're going to see artificial intelligence and virtual worlds and technologies even blowing this out, where when a technology comes online, it becomes available, and it goes widespread almost instantly. So the automobile took 13 years to go from 1% penetration to 99% penetration in Manhattan. And we're going to start to see a lot of these technologies transforming, so autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, transportation in our systems. We're living in a world where the rate of change is increasing, and this is a physical manifestation of that. So allow me to bring back on stage and turn over the podium to Salim Ismail. Salim is the author of a book you'll be getting at the end of this session as well, called Exponential Organizations. He's the founding executive director of Singularity University, global ambassador, the VP of Yahoo, a serial entrepreneur, and most importantly, a dear friend and a brilliant thinker. Please welcome Salim Ismail.
Clicker. All right. Thank you for having me, and it's great to see all of you back here again. How many of you here were here last year and heard me speak? About half of you, okay. And how many of you have heard me speak elsewhere, somewhere else? Okay. So this is going to be a little boring in some cases, depending on the material we cover. What I'm going to do is run through some of, I'm going to frame how we're seeing this inflection point in how we build businesses. And then we'll run through the model, and then Peter and I will take you through a survey together. This started off as a kind of, when we were building out a Singularity a few years ago, we had this really fascinating event happen back in 2009 when we had our first summer program. We had at the end of that summer, we had the dean of arguably the best business school in the world come through. He was on his way to a dean's conference. Like, who knew? They have dean's conferences. And he came by, and he's British, he was kind of annoyed. He had 5 newspapers with big articles circled about Singularity and about Peter and about Ray. And he said, look, I'm kind of confused. I'm arguably the best business school in the world. I can't buy an article in a newspaper. And here you have like about $2 million worth of advertising. How are you doing this? And what is the model that you're following? So we spent a few minutes trying to explain to him the basic idea and the basic model for SU. And towards the end of it, he said, you know, how big is your team? And we looked around the table, and there was like 5 of us. We said, well, that's it, because we were a startup. And his mind broke. Like, literally, you could see mentally, he just left the building. And about 4 minutes later, he said, do you mind if we go outside and play Frisbee? And for the next 2 hours, this dean of this very kind of proper fellow and proper was playing Frisbee for the next 2 hours. And he mentally just couldn't grasp it. He said, my own staff in my office, my personal staff is 12 people, right? And I was wondering what was so weird about that. It wasn't that we were that special, but what was so different about what we were doing than you could have done before? And we realized as we talked about it afterwards that a new set of tools and capabilities is available to us today, unlike anything we've seen before, starting in about 2009, 2010. Activity streams, file sharing, social networks internally, rich media externally, and so on. And so we started looking at that a little bit more and more, and this is where this concept came from. And we started looking at more seriously in about 2010, 2011, and then we decided we would write a book on it. And so Peter's been a close collaborator on the book. Might want to mention, go to this URL Peter, do you want to mention where they should go?
So, am I on here? Test 1, 2. Yeah. So each of you had this link emailed to you as well. You can copy it here. We'll leave it up here for a second. You also had it emailed to you. I'd like you to go online 1 second and get to this page so we can make sure you're on it. We're going to be going through, and you're going to be assessing one of your companies as an exponential organization. And if you have difficulty during the course, so I want to spend the next 10 minutes getting this up. It's, yes, tinyurl.com/A360-survey1.
Uppercase, lowercase is important, I think. No,
so
not important. Okay.
Are people on there? Are people starting to get on there? Yep, you're on there. Right. So if you have difficulty, please raise your hand, and members of our team will go around to you. And I'm just doing this early so that when it comes down to the survey,
We're ready to go.
Yeah, we're ready. So,
Okay. Okay, everybody got the URL? Raise your hand if you're having trouble. Okay, got it. All right, let me just leave this link up for a bit. So we started tracking this as a weak signal, and then over the about 2011, 2012, we spent a year researching very fast-moving organizations, and we were trying to catalog what are the characteristics that are having them scale so aggressively and so fast. And the benchmark metric that we came up with was that these new organizations are scaling at about a 10x, minimum 10x performance benchmark compared to their peers in the same space. How many of you are familiar with Quirky, the consumer packaged goods company? So a company called Quirky operates in the CPG or retail space. If you're Procter & Gamble, it takes about 300 days to go from a new idea to a product on sale at Walmart. Quirky does that same process, new idea to product on sale on a Walmart shelf in 29 days. Right? Unheard of in that particular industry. Same thing with Kaggle or some of these other fast-moving companies. Are operating at about a 10x performance benchmark. If you're Ford or GM, it costs about $3 billion to create a new car model from scratch. Local Motors does that same process for $3 million. So there's a 1,000x increase in that particular instance. We identified about 60 organizations operating at this scale. And the basic thesis that we've found is that we've learned over the last 10, 15 years how to scale technology, right? But how do you scale the organization structure? And which is painfully incremental and painfully linear and sublinear as you get higher. And so how do you scale the org structure? And what we've identified is this new breed of organization that can actually scale as seamlessly as technology can scale. And so that's essentially the basis of exponential organizations. So you look at Instagram or Uber or Airbnb. Did anybody see the news about Uber over the last few days, the San Francisco news? So the taxi market in San Francisco is about 140 million a year. Okay, that's the aggregate revenue in the taxi industry in San Francisco. Uber in San Francisco is generating $500 million a year. They're doing 3x the entire taxi business just in San Francisco because not only have they done a 70% dent in the taxi business there, but they've created a whole new market of people that wouldn't travel otherwise that are now traveling and leveraging Uber. That's why the market cap is so insane. If you take $500 million and multiply that by 200 cities around the world or 400 cities around the world, that number gets kind of interesting pretty quickly. Right? And so Uber at this point is valued at that level. Airbnb, same thing. Have you mentioned the statistics around Airbnb? So Airbnb 2 years ago was worth, Peter Thiel invested in it at a 40% valuation of that of Hyatt hotels worldwide. And people said, well, you're a little bit crazy, that's a hell of a valuation. Today, Airbnb is worth more than Hyatt hotels, right, in 2 years. By the end of this year, Airbnb will be the biggest hotel chain in the world. And they don't own any hotels. Right? What a cool business to be in, to be the biggest in a marketplace and not have any of the hassles, legacy assets, workforce to worry about, et cetera. Where Hyatt has about 45,000 employees, Airbnb has about 1,500. And so if they need to pivot or change strategy, much more agile, much more manageable that way. And so we're seeing a whole host of these, whether it's Square, Airbnb, et cetera, Dropbox, et cetera, all scaling in a very fascinating way that we've been able to do before. We mentioned TED. TED is a great example of this. Started off as a nice high-end conference, about 1,000 people a year in Monterey. Chris Anderson took it over. It had plateaued at kind of that level. Chris Anderson took it over and he did two things. He released all the TED Talks as free videos on YouTube, leveraging rich media and leveraging that phenomena. And we mentioned the TEDx phenomena. And in 5 years, he's created a global media brand. Right? Nobody has ever created a global media brand that fast. And the cost of his doing so was kind of pretty much zero. And so we've now identified about 60 or 70 organizations operating at this pace, moving and scaling the org structure as seamlessly as we can operate technology. There's some really fascinating examples. How many of you are familiar with GitHub? So GitHub is an open source coding platform. Their MTP is social coding. we found that collaborative software development is much better and more effective than individuals hunkered down by themselves. And so they've created a instant messaging stream and created a whole social layer around open source software. So if I submit code to a GitHub project, the other developers rate my code. They actually rate my code. And so I get a eBay-type reputational ranking based on how good my code is from my peers. Okay? Today, and so we want to get a sense of how successful GitHub has been. The old open source platforms had about 500,000 projects on them. GitHub is up to about 12 million projects on it. About 15 million developers use the system. And to the extent, and we talked about education earlier, your salary as a developer in Silicon Valley today is not determined by the university you went to, which computer science program you attended, what your grades were at school, at university. Your salary is determined by your GitHub rating. Right? So we've turned this whole model now into a peer-to-peer, very fair, reviewed system, and people help each other, they coach each other, et cetera. And it's a fascinating example of how this paradigm is absolutely exploding. GitHub has open sourced its own capability, so when they want internal work done, they just ask the community and they offer to help out. And so this is essentially the fundamental paradigm and formula we're seeing. And there's three fundamental elements in what make up an exponential organization. We've talked about the MTP, so I won't cover that, but all of the exponential organizations we found have one, whether it's social coding, whether it's organize the world's information, et cetera. Just a quick comment on some of the ones we heard earlier from you folks. You want to keep it really tight and succinct, right? A paragraph is too long. It should be almost a tagline that a community can get excited about. Coca-Cola, for example, has just taken on an MTP. Their MTP is open happiness, not sell sugar water, right? Open happiness. And so they're trying to gear their entire organization around that. For example, last year, or a couple of years ago, when the storm hit the Philippines, having that MTP gave the CEO of Coca-Cola in the Philippines the freedom to say, you know, I'm going to take my entire ad budget for the year and spend it on disaster relief. Because there's no, if I can't help the general population, then I'm not going to be able to do much else later either. And so he actually was able to do that. And so it gives you the air cover to do something really purposeful and important. And we have a thesis that we're going to see brands merging into this MTP concept. We'll start to see brands morph into this, and Coca-Cola is an early adopter there. So that's the general formula. I'll go through each of these in a bit of detail. I won't spend too long on it because many of you have heard some of these before, but worth going into some details so you can answer the questions effectively. So the old model of building a business was essentially to gather a workforce or get an asset, put a legal boundary around it, and then sell access to that scarcity. Right? Whether it was an IP portfolio, whether it's a hotel on a beach, a great chef, or a design team, essentially we're selling scarcity. That's how we've been building businesses since the beginning of time. What these new exponential organizations do is they tap into abundance. And what they're doing is tapping into resources and assets that they don't own, that they don't they don't need to manage in the same way, et cetera. So the first one is staff on demand. There's 5 externalities that these organizations are using to scale outside their traditional boundaries. If you think about Uber, the mission critical aspect of Uber, where a driver meets a rider and gets a ride somewhere, doesn't happen inside the organizational boundary. It's happening out in the community. Same with the TEDx events are happening out there somewhere, not in the core organization. So it allows you to keep a very, very small footprint of people, keep it very agile, and then scale your organization outward. So the first one is staff on demand, which is essentially, here's our old theory of 20th century employment. This is from Michael Chu from McKinsey's. The idea was the best way to harness talent is to have full-time employees operating on an agreed mission statement with clear job descriptions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? Totally gone. The new model is essentially tap into a lot of the platforms that we have around us. Where is Marcus? Marcus Shingles from Deloitte over there did this fascinating study where, how many of you are familiar with GigWalk? GigWalk is a platform about 500,000 users with smartphones. And you can say to GigWalk users, I will pay you $10 to go into a Walmart and see if my product is on the right shelf that I've been promised from my merchandising agreements, take a photograph of it, and if it's out of stock, tick this button, and that gets fed back. And you can essentially deploy, get thousands of workers instantly working on this idea and going into 500 or 1,000 Walmart stores instantly all around the world. Results come back within an hour. Right? And so you can now leverage this external community as eyes and ears to do whatever you want. Many of you are familiar with Odesk or Elance, where you can do software development. How many of you are familiar with Odesk? Well, quite a few of you. Odesk actually gives you the ability to oversee a developer while they're coding and working on your work, so you can see what they're doing, and gives you some sense of monitoring. Or Freelancer or Crowdflower. Granddaddy, this is Mechanical Turk, an Amazon platform where you can give them bite-sized pieces of work to do. And the question to ask here at the bottom is, where are you using full-time employees where you could outsource that? Right? And a key reason for this is, in the old last few hundred years, it's been really important in any organization to be able to scale internally, and we manage for predictability and we manage for efficiency. Now we need to manage for agility and we need to manage for scale. And so if you're going to do that, you want to have as few people internally in the core organization as possible to give you that agility around that. And kind of shifting as much of a workload to a variable cost is a really critical part of that. The second part of that, the C in scale, is community and crowd. Right? And so this is now looking into that. Different from staff on demand, where I'm giving them a specific piece of work to be done. The community is essentially your employees, your vendors, your suppliers, your fans, your users, your customers. And then everybody outside that is the crowd, right? And in community, there's a great example of Chris Anderson with DIY drones. How many of you are familiar with Chris Anderson's DIY drones community? So Chris Anderson has created this community of 40,000 drones enthusiasts around the world that contribute to the open source development of drones. They were able to take the $5 million Predator drone, that's not $5 million, that one there, but they can take the the US military has a $5 million Predator drone. They are able to replicate 98% of the functionality of that $5 million drone for $280. Okay? Now, a lot of the 2% is the weaponry, granted, but it's still an astounding number that they're able to do this. And Chris actually finds that if you create an MTP and go latch onto a community and create a community around it, they will tell you what the products and services are, right? So he was trying to figure out what to do with this community, and a bunch of them said, hey, we want a DIY kit. And he said, I'm not really interested in that. And they went off and just created it themselves. And they said, we want you to sell it. So now he's become a sales organization for this kit created by the community. So now we're creating this fascinating interplay between the core organization. And it's an open question whether he is the community or whether he's a company at all. And from his ethos, serving the long-term needs of the community will yield products and services. And so he's simply listening to them and going down that route. And the huge advantages to having a community are you can use an MTP, attract one, and now they will tell you what they want. They act as research groups, market surveys, customer feedback, et cetera, and they're passionate about what you do, and they'll help evangelize, they can help you sell, and a big chunk of many of our traditional business processes can now be shifted to the community, right? Really important to nurture them very, very well. Lots of possibilities as to what to do. Crowdfunding is a fascinating new phenomenon. Many of you are familiar with Kickstarter, right? Kickstarter and these crowdfunding platforms do something much more than raise the funding, by the way. With Kickstarter, for the first time in the history of business, I can fully validate a market idea without actually building the product. Right? So there's really something fascinating happening there, and it's changing the fundraising game quite heavily. So for example, if you have a great idea and come to me with it as an investor, the first thing I would say is put it up on Kickstarter. I want to see if there's market demand. If there's not market demand, I'm not going to invest in you. If there is market demand, you don't need me. Right? And so we've just changed the game in equity funding pretty fundamentally. But most importantly, for the first time ever, I can market validate a product without building it. And that's kind of a cool thing to be able to do. So we think this is going to have a transformative effect on product development where we can leverage crowdfunding and some of these platforms to do this. There's a company in San Francisco called Gustin Jeans, and their MTP is designer jeans for everyone. Everybody has their MTP. And so they basically go to designers who submit ideas. If enough people pre-purchase a particular design, the designer gets the money and the genes get delivered. Right? So they have no inventory, they have no costs, they have no overhead, they have no staff. They're acting as a conduit and a convener of all of this aggregate value. The second part of it, the last part of it, is really incentive competitions are really useful for turning crowd into community. Okay? So Peter is a world expert in that, obviously, from the XPRIZE world. What we found when analyzing is gamification and engagement are really good to retain and get your community excited. Incentive prizes help turn crowd into community. The next one is algorithms. The A. We're seeing more and more organizations. If you look at all of the really fast-moving companies today, Uber, Airbnb, Google, et cetera, they're all data-oriented and data analytic-driven. Right? And so what they've managed to do is get a big data set and leverage and harness that capability. Google is maybe the godfather of this. Their cost of running an extra search is almost zero. And yet they get a few pennies per search that's conducted, 99.9% gross margin in that kind of a good business to be in if you have that kind of leverage. Same thing with UPS, which uses very sophisticated algorithms to route its trucks around and decide what truck should go where. They found, for example, it's better to do 3 right-hand turns than to do a left-hand turn and wait. And so the trucks have very specific prescribed routes, and they're able to save a huge amount of money by leveraging algorithms effectively. Jeremy Howard, I think, will be speaking later, and when you hear his talk, you'll get a sense of how dramatic algorithms are to play in the world. This will be quite transformative. An organization of the future that does not use algorithms to navigate a lot of its data sets will be wiped out pretty quickly. Because the ones that are doing that will overperform and outperform ones, and I think Jeremy will make that point much better than I can. Also, when you're totally data-driven and ruthlessly so, you take out all the politics of any company decision. And so we found that companies that implement a lot of these attributes become depoliticized, which is kind of a holy grail for company culture, right? Second part of today, if you think about how many of you do your jobs and lead your companies, is based on your experience and the intuitive guesses that you have about your previous experience. And so in the future, when we can essentially run this via data sets and do analysis on this, when you run machine learning algorithms, they will actually test like 10,000 different multivariate combinations, which you can't possibly do as an individual, and the answer is always going to be much better than what you can do by yourself. Okay? Several steps to implement algorithms. First, gather the data, either publicly or privately, organize it into data sets, and it doesn't have to be complete, by the way. We have this kind of view that data has to be complete and clean, et cetera, et cetera. It turns out it doesn't need to be the case. These algorithms can navigate around holes in the data. Then you take machine learning and deep learning algorithms to apply it. And the last thing, the most interesting thing, is if you can take a lot of the data that you own and expose it to your community and let them build products and services on it, interesting things will happen as you're able to do that. Okay? The fourth one is L for leased assets, similar to staff on demand. You don't want to have to own your own assets. Foxconn is maybe the most fascinating example of this. A mission-critical aspect of Apple is outsourced to this key partner, right? Same with cloud services. And frankly, Amazon Web Services was probably the inflection point that allowed the creation of exponential organizations. For the first time in March 2006, when they launched web services, you could have your software and your server configuration be a completely variable cost rather than fixed cost, and that drove the price drop very dramatically down that we've seen that Peter talked about. And all of these organizations like Airbnb, Lyft, Uber, essentially they're tapping the assets that they don't own, right? If you own a car, it sits empty about 96% of the time. And so when you can tap into that with some of these services and reduce that lack of utilization, very interesting things become possible. How many of you are familiar with TechShop? So TechShop is a makerspace. They use an exercise gym model membership to navigate to have drive membership and drive value. So you join a gym, and you pay $100 a month to have access to heavy equipment that is very expensive and too cumbersome to have at home, TechShop gives you that same capability to make anything you want. You pay about $150 a month, and you can make anything you want. So one fellow wanted to set the world motorcycle speed record, couldn't buy that motorcycle, he went to TechShop and built it. Right? Square, the payment system that you're all familiar with, that was a TechShop project. It was prototyped and built at TechShop, and then once they got success, then you can scale. So we've turned every aspect of what traditionally was R&D, product development, et cetera, now into variable costs, leveraging these externalities, right? The last piece of this is engagement, the E. When we have an information-based environment, you can now have a feedback loop. And we've now turned our marketing environments into very digital feedback loops with social media and all of the analytics that we can run on it. But basically, you can have digital reputation systems. Gamification, as I mentioned, is really useful to engage and keep your community active. And then incentive prizes turn crowd into community. Right? So Peter, when he runs a new X Prize, engages a whole new set of people that had never heard of X Prize, and now they're members of the community. Right? So those are the 5 attributes of the externalities that these organizations are scaling and how they're using to scale outside their core organization structure. We'll cover next the 5 internal mechanisms. Before we get into the survey, I'll just mention this one statistic. What we found is out of those 10 attributes, if you implement 4 or more, you get the 10x performance benchmark. You get a 10x performance improvement if you implement 4 or more of those techniques. So let me turn it back to Peter and we'll start going through this survey.
So what we're going to be doing now is actually doing a survey on those first 5 attributes. And we're going to ask you to do, here's the process. Go ahead and bring these in, guys. We're going to actually go one survey question at a time. Salim and I are going to talk about it for a couple minutes, for 2 minutes. We have the timers ready, and give you some clarity on the questions again. I would like you then to take 1 minute and choose your answer, think about it. You're going to then partner with somebody there and validate your answer with them. So what I find is that most of us are optimists. We bullshit ourselves about how great our company is, what we really do, and it's a lot harder to do that when you're in conversation with somebody. So you're going to have, for each of these questions, I think 4 choices, and you're going to think about which one is truly yours, and I want you to validate it with your partner and explain why you're that awesome or that poor, and then actually enter it. We'll go to the next. We're going to do the first 5 attributes. I have it over here on my computer, and Salim, let's go ahead and
okay, everybody ready? Okay, if you don't have access, you can write down the answers and we can add it up later in a kind of very crude analog kind of way.
So again, the Wi-Fi code is A360. You all had the link sent to you. And so the first one is on staff on demand.
Right, so the question here is to what extent does your organization, the one that you're scoring, use full-time employees versus on-demand contractors, right? And if you look at the 4 options there, number 1 is we only use full-time employees. Number 2 is we use mostly full-time employees, but we use contractors in non-mission critical areas like cleaning staff, maintaining copiers, et cetera, et cetera. Number 3 is we use some on-demand contractors to augment mission critical areas like software development, operations, production, et cetera. And number 4 is you mostly have on-demand staff and you keep a very, very small core team of full-time employees. So rate your organization 1 to 4.
We should do both on this.
The second question is to what extent do you leverage external resources to perform business functions? And this is different from how many employees you have and where your employees sit, is where is your work getting done? So if you say most business functions are handled by internal employees, for example, Uber, as I mentioned, most of the business functions are not done by the core employees. They're done outside in the community, right? So if mostly is done by internally, it would be a 1. If you outsource some administrative and support functions like AR, accounting, audit, et cetera, that would be a 2. If you outsource some mission critical areas like Apple or Foxconn, key mission critical areas outsourced, that's a 3. And number 4 would be Agility is absolutely the high order bit. Everything is outsourced. We do very little core mission critical functions internally. The second question is about crowd and community. How do you leverage, to what extent do you manage and interact with your community? Okay? In our old way of doing business, the community is kind of out there. We didn't really interact much with them. And if you think about most large companies and most Fortune 100 companies, they don't really interact much with their community. And the second part is, how do you engage with that community? So the question here is, to what extent do you manage and interact with your community? By that we mean your users, customers, vendors, partners, agents, and fans. Number one would be, we have very passive involvement. We use a bit of social media, that's about it. Level two would be, we leverage our community for market research and we listen to them very closely. Level three would be, we actively use the community for outreach, support, and marketing. And level four would be, the community heavily influences our organization and drives product development and ideation, right? So if your community actually helps drive product development, that's a 4. If you're actively integrating and working with the community, that's a 3. If you're listening to them for market research, that's the 2. And if you have a Facebook page, that's a 1. Right? And hopefully you have a Facebook page. There's no 0 in that. Okay. The second question is, how do you engage with them? What are the mechanisms by which you talk to and listen to them? Number one is, we don't have much engagement beyond standard customer service or CRM capabilities. Level two is, our community is centralized and communication is one-to-many. Like, for example, LinkedIn, it's a one-to-many communication from the company out to its community. Number three is, the community is decentralized, but the communication is many-to-many. Sorry, LinkedIn is that. The communication is many-to-many because you have peer-to-peer communication on that platform, Facebook, LinkedIn, et cetera, et cetera. And number four would be that the community is decentralized and value is being created on a peer-to-peer basis. True community happens when there's value creation in the peer-to-peer model. And you're essentially the convener and arbiter, but you're not driving a one-to-one relationship with each of the community members, okay? So that's one, standard customer service. 2, we have a one-way communication with the community. 3, the community talks to each other. 4, they're actively creating value amongst the community. For example, at Singularity, many of the alumni get together and start businesses, et cetera, and we hope that that's
so let's
happening
take
more and more.
2 minutes, please, and answer then.
Answer and discuss and justify and validate and whatever to your partner. 2 minutes. Okay. So the next question, the next segment is algorithms, and there are 2 questions here. Number one, to what extent do you use algorithms to make meaningful decisions? And secondly, do you share the data aggressively inside your organization and outside your organization? So with algorithms, the 4 options are: level 1, we don't do any real meaningful data analytics or analysis of in our organization. Level 2 is, we collect and analyze the data, but mostly via reporting systems and ERP systems and standard CRM type of systems. Number 3 is, we use machine learning to drive analytical and data decisions. We use machine learning actively, level 3. And level 4 is, our products and services are actually built around algorithms, like PageRank, right? Your products and services have algorithms built into them to leverage and harness data capabilities. So those are the 4 options for algorithms for question 5. The second question is, do you share your data internally and externally? Level 1 of that is, we don't share data even between departments, which is true for most big companies. Richard here is raising his hand on the...
Raise my hand to him.
Oh, got it. Okay, gotcha. Okay. Which is worse. Yeah, it could be. Number 2 is, we share data between departments using wikis, internal databases, et cetera, et cetera. Level 3 is, we expose some key data to partners, suppliers using EDI or APIs. Number 4 is, we expose data to the external ecosystem. If your community has access to your data and can build products and services on that, like you can leverage the Facebook API or LinkedIn, or Google has many APIs, then that's a 4. Level 3 is, we share data and we use it, and we share it internally very aggressively. Level 2 is, level 3 is, we share it between suppliers, only with our suppliers. Level 2 is, we share it internally. Level 1, we don't really share the data. I remember once talking to one of the biggest banks in the world. They had 300 different customer databases. each department, mortgages, loans, deposits, et cetera, had its own customer database. They had 300 different customer databases across the bank. What a nightmare to manage. So,
2 minutes.
algorithms, you have 2 minutes, answer and discuss. Go. So, if we wrap it up and we'll end algorithms, let's go to the next question set, which is leased assets. And this is pretty simple. If you have the core assets of your organization, how do you relate to those assets, right? To what extent do you own versus rent or access or leverage your assets? Number one is we own all the assets except peripheral equipment like your copiers. Maybe you lease those, but we own most other equipment and assets in the company. Number two is we access some key equipment and services on demand like cloud computing or other aspects like that. Level three is we use on-demand assets in multiple business functions. Hacker spaces, we're renting office space rather than buying. We're using cloud computing for a lot of things. We lease cars, we don't buy them, etc. And then level four is if you use leased or leveraged assets in mission critical areas, like Apple and Foxconn, right?
Or Uber,
or Uber
doesn't have cars, which is a fundamental part of their business.
Yeah, or Airbnb with the hotel room. So if a core part of your product and service is leveraging external assets, that's a 4. If you have several business functions operating on leveraged assets or leased assets, that's a 3. If it's in one area, it's a 2, and if you own most of it, it's a 1. Okay?
All right, 2 minutes.
The next one is the last one of the externalities is engagement. How do you engage, and what are the mechanics by which you engage your community or leverage the crowd? And the first question is, do you actively convert crowd into community? Okay? Do you actively convert crowd into community? So number one is we use standard tactics like PR to increase awareness of our products and services. Level 2 is we leverage social media aggressively for marketing purposes. Level 3 is we use gamification and incentive prizes to turn crowd into community. Okay? And level 4 is our products and services have that mechanism built into them very aggressively, like the lift mustache or that's viral in its very nature. That's level 4. Okay? So level 1, we use PR. Level 2, we use social media. Level 3, we use actively gamification and incentive prizes. Level 4 is our products and services have the engagement paradigm built into them, right into the core. Foursquare, reputation systems, et cetera, would be examples of that. The second question is, to what extent do you use gamification or incentive competition? Again, similar type of a question. We use gamification and incentive prize for internal motivations only, like employee of the month. That would be a classic example of that. Number 2 is we use basic gamification externally, like loyalty programs, frequent flyer programs, and so on. Level 3 is our gamification incentive concepts are built into our products and services like Foursquare. And 4, we actually use gamification incentive prizes to drive product development. So X Prize would be an example of that, or Quirky or Kaggle. Quirky has 1 million inventors submitting ideas to it, so they've used the incentive and engagement model as a core part of their product offering, right? And so they've built it right into that mechanism. So pick 1 to 4 out of those, validate your answers. You have 2 minutes, go. So hopefully you've gone through the questions and answered them for your organization. For this 5 externalities that we've talked about, scale, right? Staff on demand, community and crowd, algorithms, leveraged assets or leased assets, and engagement. And all of these organizations are using one or more of those externalities, as I said, to scale outside the core organization. Let's now have a conversation about the 5 internal elements as to how do these exponential organizations manage their internal mechanics. And similar to the externalities, what we found when we did our research was that these exponential organizations have a much tighter control framework than traditional organizations, because there's so much happening outside the core organization. You need to keep a really tight handle on it. And so it's a really interesting model to see how well they're doing this. Let me go through all 5 of these. The first is interface processes. Okay? So Quirky, when it has 1 million inventors submitting ideas to it, has a whole set of filters, algorithms, ranking, validating, matching, reviewing to decide which product it should go after. Uber has very specific interfaces to deal with all its drivers and all of its riders. The Apple App Store has very specific algorithms to decide what apps to let into the App Store out of the millions that are submitted. And this actually creates a form of intellectual property for exponential organizations. The interface by which you deal with these externalities become core IP. Right? The algorithm that Uber uses to match drivers and riders and rank distance and rating on both driver and rider side are quite critical to its success and a very core part of intellectual property. And so the interfaces around how we navigate these externalities are fairly key around this. And you could think of this as interfaces allow you to manage abundance. Okay? In previous times, same with if you're running an incentive prize, Peter has hundreds of submissions. They need those interfaces to filter and rank and bring them down. So interfaces are a really critical part of taking abundance on the outside and deciding what to deal with on the inside. The second part of this is dashboards, and dashboards in terms of real-time monitoring of what's happening in your organization. And there are two flavors to this. One is the employee management and team performance benchmarks, and the second is the external metrics of the organization. Real-time tracking of sales figures, conversion rates, website visits, tracking, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really important because when you're moving at such a pace, if you make a small mistake, it can grow big very, very quickly. And this type of a dashboard allows you to manage a much flatter organization if you're keeping a real-time handle on what's happening on the externalities and what's the live metrics plus the OKRs. How many of you are familiar with OKRs? Show of hands. So OKR stands for Objectives and Key Results. This was invented by Intel, and John Doerr brought it over to Google. The way you do OKRs is you set a very high objective, like increase sales by 50%. And then you set about 5 metrics by which you can show that you're achieving your objectives, 5 key results. And in general, about 2/3 of your key results should be achievable. The team has full flexibility on which of the 5 they achieve, right? So you give a lot of local flexibility with an agreed broad objective, and it's proven to be the most lightweight monitoring mechanisms. All of the fast growth companies, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Google, all use OKRs to manage their employees and manage their teams. In Google, they've taken it even a step further. They've made their OKRs completely transparent. So I can, if I'm a Google employee, look up anybody else's historical performance plus their current objectives and see whether my motivations are lined up with them. I can even look up Larry Page's OKRs and see how's he done, right? And so really fascinating around this. And this is turning out to be a really key mechanism for managing fast growth organizations in a very lightweight way. And then that's the internal side. The external side is live transaction analysis and real-time monitoring of the business. The lean metric model looks at this. And you can even track now real-time creativity almost. There are now sociometric badges where you give a team a kind of an armband. And by the relative motion of their armband with the team physically in relation to each other, they can predict creativity of the team. Right? Really fascinating to see as we're going to get to this model that we call the quantified employee. We have today the quantified self, where you can measure all sorts of things about us. What happens when you have the quantified employee or the quantified team, where you have all these kind of data streams and analytics about the team members and individuals in your organization, right? So that's dashboards, both with an external flavor and an internal flavor. The third one is experimentation. When the external world is changing as fast as it is, you need to constantly tune your processes on the inside to keep pace and match with that, right? And the second element of this experimentation is the taking of risk. All of our organization structures are built to withstand risk and withstand change. And I found that when I tried to do interesting things at Brickhouse, which was Yahoo's incubator, how many of you have been involved in an incubator or disruptive innovation at the edges of your organization, right? You'll have found that if you do disruptive innovation inside the organizational boundaries, that the immune system of the company will come and attack you. right? And because it's like an organism, it wants to keep the status quo, and it's built to withstand external risk and external change. But now today, external risk is the higher order bit. Quickly changing and navigating and being adaptable is key. And so you have to constantly iterate and tweak your processes. One of the anecdotes when we looked at the research for the book, the old Iridium story where they launched satellites to do telecommunications, the business plan assumptions in Iridium did not change for 12 years. You wonder why the company failed. They didn't change any of their business plan assumptions for 12 years. Meanwhile, cell phones were going through the roof. And there's no way today, if you're not keeping in touch with what's happening. We're finding even in areas like HR and legal that people are using the lean startup methodology to tweak processes and iterate. How many of you are familiar with the lean startup methodology? Right? Many of you, great. By the way, it turns out that the whole lean startup philosophy doesn't really work that well for startups. It works really well for big companies and medium-sized organizations to constantly tune. Because in a startup, your higher order bit is worrying about running out of money, and the chaos in dealing with it overwhelms the kind of finesse that comes with the lean startup methodology. The third part is you surface lots of bottom-up ideas when you do this type of capability. And so the idea here is to constantly encourage risk-taking inside your overall organization. Amazon, for example, measures every team, how many experiments did you run? How many failed, how many succeeded, how big were they, et cetera. And they track those as KPIs for all of their teams and all the individuals, right? So this is a key part of it. Ratan Tata, the Indian billionaire, finds the 3 managers in his organization that took the biggest risk and failed, and he puts them on stage and gives them a huge cash prize because he wants to reward that type of cultural effort to constantly push the boundaries. Because if your organization is not constantly pushing the boundaries, there are others that will, and you'll be left behind pretty quickly. Okay, so that's experimentation. The third one is autonomy, or fourth one is autonomy. How many of you are familiar with Valve Software? Valve is a software company out of Seattle that has no internal hierarchy. There's no job descriptions, no CEO, no reporting lines, no middle management, no meetings. They operate like a beehive, okay? And they have more revenue per employee than Microsoft. And so if I join Valve, they hire self-starters. I work with this team for a bit. If I like that team, I work with them. If I don't like them, I will go work over there. And they've shown that you can do some extraordinary things with them. They've actually open sourced their whole employee handbook for how to operate in this style. If you're so interested, it's worth a read. And so having autonomous, decentralized structures allows you to have key decisions made at the edges of the organization and not have to worry senior management about every little thing. And so autonomy is a really key part of it. If you're going to have autonomy, you really need an MTP, because it keeps everybody focused on what the core attributes and the core purpose of the organization is. Maybe the most dramatic example that we found around this was a Chinese company called Haier, H-A-I-E-R. It's a huge $60 billion company. They make all of the fridges and ovens in China and around Southeast Asia. I think they made 55 million fridges last year. It's a lot of fridges, right? 10 years ago, the CEO looked at their 80,000 person company and decided that he could not achieve the corporate goals with this old hierarchical structure, and he blew it up. And he turned it into 2,000 fully autonomous teams, about 40 people each. And so each team chooses what they want to do by themselves. They compete with each other in a kind of an ecosystem. They elect their own leader. Each team works with customers, vendors, suppliers. They vote on what features the next fridge should have. There's no central planning. They've tripled their market cap twice in the last decade by implementing this mechanism. And so what we see here is you can actually do this. It's a fairly aggressive change, right? Changes the culture quite a bit. A lot of people leave, et cetera, et cetera. But he showed that you could take, a whole book has been written about this as a case study to show that you can take this old structure and blow it open in a completely new way. The final part of the internal mechanisms is social technologies. If you're going to have an autonomous structure, you need really good communication across the organization. And we're finding that activity streams, file sharing, social objects, et cetera, is creating what Gartner calls the zero latency organization. Many of you are using Yammer or Chatter or some of these techniques. The latest ones are Slack. And a really great one that just came out a few days ago is called Notable, K-N-O-T-A-B-L-E. It allows a kind of real-time wiki with file sharing and so on in a conversational thread, really worth checking out. And this enables the real-time enterprise, right? Even today, they've shown studies that show that word of mouth, which is a key metric for sales, only 7% of word of mouth today is online. So we have a long way to go to really socializing and turning everything into a social environment, right? So those are the 5 internal mechanisms for this. Let's go to the survey and we'll start looking through the questions around this, and you can score your organization based on these questions. So the first question is, the first 2 questions are around interfaces. Number 1 is, do you have specialized processes for managing your community, crowd, staff on demand, leased assets, engagement, et cetera, right? Now, if you don't manage your externalities, then that's a 1. We don't really leverage them, or we have no special processes around this. Level 2 is we have dedicated staff to manage externalities, right? So Peter has dedicated staff at X Prize to manage each of the prizes, et cetera. Level 3 is you've automated the processing of some of these externalities. At Elance or Donors Choose, they've got, or Google AdWords, they've got self-provisioning platforms where I can go sign up myself, and they've automated that externality. And then level 4 is you've automated many externalities, not just supply, but also demand, and you've got several automated interfaces for navigating your external environment, leveraging your community, leveraging your staff, and so on. Okay, so that's the first question. Second question is, how replicable and scalable are core processes outside the organization? So for example, if you have mostly traditional, mostly manual processes, usually controlled by what's called the SOP, standard operating procedure, that's level 1. Level 2 is some of the processes are scalable and repeatable, but only inside the organization. Okay? Level 3 is some processes operate outside the organization, like TEDx events or franchise models, et cetera, and they scale and replicate outside the organization. Level 4 is most of our core processes operate outside the org structure, right? So in Dan's case, if he had peer-to-peer coaching aggressively in the community, that would be like a level 4. Or Uber, most of the mission-critical activities and processes are happening and scaling outside the core organization. And so those are the 2 questions. 2 minutes to discuss and answer. Go. All right, let's move on to the next one, which is dashboards. For this one, what metrics do you track about your organization and your innovation structure and your innovation portfolio, right? So do you use lean startup analytics? The questions or the specifics around this are, we only track traditional KPIs like monthly sales, annual cost, profits, et cetera. Very traditional. Sorry, that's breakfast. Number 2 is we collect some real-time metrics from transactional systems like ERP systems. So if you track KPIs using internal metrics and ERP systems, that's level 2. Level 3 is we collect real-time metrics and some startup metrics, but real-time. And level 4 is we collect real-time metrics and lead startup value metrics like repeat usage, monetization, NPS scores, et cetera. How many of you are familiar with NPS? NPS stands for Net Promoter Score. It's the gauge of how word of mouth, how viral your product or service is. If you don't use NPS in your business, do it. It's really, really relevant, okay? So that's the second question is, do you use some variant of OKRs in your organization? Level 1 is no, we don't use OKRs. Level 2 is we have OKRs in innovation processes, but not elsewhere in the organization. Level 3 is we use OKRs across the organization, like LinkedIn or Facebook. Level 4 is we use it and it's transparent across the organization. So, okay, 2 minutes, go. Next question is experimentation and the taking of risk inside your organization. If I had to pick one internal attribute that you should think about really adopting, this would be the one. So the questions around this, do you constantly optimize processes through experimentation, A/B testing, lean startup, short feedback loops, et cetera, et cetera? And the options here are, number 1, no, we use traditional business process management, BPM. Level 2 is we use the lean approach for customer-facing areas like marketing. Level 3 is we use the lean startup methodology or experimentation for product innovation and product development. And then level 4 is we use that experimentation methodology for all core functions, even HR and legal are constantly tweaking and experimenting, etc. So those are the 4 options around experimentation and optimizing processes. The second question is, do you encourage and tolerate failure and risk-taking inside your organization? Number 1, failure is not an option, like NASA, one of the issues that NASA has had over the while. Or it's a career-limiting move, what's known as a CLM. Level 2, failure and risk are encouraged, but in name only. If you actually fail, you lose your capabilities inside the organization, and they aren't tracked or quantified. Level 3, failure and risk-taking are allowed and measured, but sandboxed in skunkworks or innovation processes or very defined boundaries. And number 4, failure and risk-taking are expected, pervasive, measured, and even celebrated across the organization. Like Procter & Gamble has heroic failure awards, Ratan Tata has his capability, etc. Okay? So those are the 4 options around experimentation. You have 2 minutes, go. Let's move on to the next one, which is authority and autonomy. Okay? So question 1 here around autonomous structures and decentralized decision-making. Do you operate with large traditional hierarchical structures or small multidisciplinary self-organizing teams? Okay? So the level 1 in the first question is, we have a traditional corporate hierarchy with large specialized groups operating in silos, which is most big companies. Number 2, we have some small multidisciplinary teams operating at the edges away from the core organization. Level 3, we have some small multidisciplinary teams accepted and embraced within the core organization. Okay? That's a subtle one, but important. And level 4 is we have small multidisciplinary network self-organizing teams as the primary departmental structure or operating structure across the organization. Okay? So to what extent do you have your organization as large hierarchies or small multidisciplinary teams? Question 2 is, to what extent is authority pushed down to the edges and decentralized? If level 1 is we use traditional top-down command and control. Level 2 is we use decentralized decision-making in R&D, innovation, product development, but not elsewhere. Level 3 is decentralized decision-making happens in customer-facing areas, like your call centers and so on have a lot of autonomy as to how they deal with customers. And then level 4 is all key decisions are decentralized except for the mission, purpose, culture of the organization, but pretty much everything else is decentralized. So you have 2 minutes, go. Last one is social technologies. 3 questions here. Okay? There's 3 questions here. The first one is really external facing rather than internal, but it's an important one, which is to what extent are your products and services information based, right? Because then you can really scale. And this is a key element. Now, so level 1 here, our products and services are very physical, like Starbucks or Levi's jeans, or most traditional retailers. Level 2 is our products are physical, but delivery and production is information enabled or information based, like Amazon. Level 3 is our products are physical, but a lot of the revenue and service streams are information based, like the iPhone and the App Store. The physical product is like almost a lost leader to get you to buy other stuff. And number 5, or level 4, is our products and services are completely information based, like Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. Uber in this case would be a 3, for example. Okay? The second question is, to what extent do you use social and collaborative aspects inside your organization and inside a part of the product and service offering? So this means, how social are your processes and products and services, right? So if you have just a coffee cup, it's not very social, but a coffee cup that tweets, kind of social, right? So that would be the distinction there. So number 1, no social collaborative aspect is designed into our products and services, e.g. buying a lawnmower. Level 2 is we have bolted these things onto the side, like we have a product and it has a Twitter feed or a Facebook page. Number 3 is social collaborative functionality is used to enhance or deliver the product service offerings like 99 Designs or Indiegogo or TaskRabbit, and we build it in from the edge. And number 4 is the social structures actually build the product, okay? So if you look at Waze or Yelp would be a good example, the social mechanism actually is the product, and the fact that people are providing feedback gives them saleable content that they then leverage. So that would be the level 4 of that. And the final question is, do you use advanced social technologies for internal communication, collaboration, and teamworking? So number 1, no, email is our primary communication vehicle inside the company. Level 2, some teams use social tools, but not across the organization. Level 3 is many business units use social tools, but the CIO hates it, and it's not authorized by the central management. And number 4, the use of collaborative technologies is mandated as policy across the organization. Okay? By the way, I think the CIO is the hardest job in the world today. Very difficult to manage. So those are the 4 levels of that question. You have 2 minutes, go. Last question. Last question in the survey relates to your MTP. And the question is, what is the nature and focus of your organizational purpose or mission? So if you have a bog standard mission focused on delivering the best products and services to add value to your ecosystem, customers, suppliers, partners, level 1. Level 2, our mission focuses on core values as an organization, but we're extending that and past that and wanting to deliver products and services, but really building out and using products and services to deliver on a core value. Level 3 is our mission is much broader than just serving our customers. It wants to bring positive change to the entire ecosystem. Level 4, we have a transformational purpose that goes beyond a mission statement. We aspire to deliver significance to the whole world. That's level 4, like yourself over there. Okay, so you have 1 minute, go. Let me wrap up the framing for these exponential organizations, and then we'll open up to a general Q&A. What we've just gone through and the survey is the first half of the book. We kind of looked at all of these 60, 80 organizations and tabulated what are the mechanisms they're using. And as I mentioned, if you look across, they all have an MTP, all of them. And they're using 4 out of 10 of these attributes to get to a 10x performance level. In general, the more they use, the better they are. In a few days, we'll be releasing a list of the top 50 EXOs worldwide. At the current, as we tabulate that, GitHub seems to be the most exponential organization that we've been able to find. The second half of the book is how do you do it? How do you apply these ideas? How do you start a company as a scalable exponential organization? How do you apply it to a mid-market company? And many of you run mid-cap organizations. And a chunk of the book at the back is how do you retrofit these ideas into a large organization? Okay? The starting a company is summarized by Peter's work in bold. Pick an MTP, go create a community around it, come up with a transformative breakthrough idea, start building it out. And there's a 12-step program to doing that in chapter 6. The mid-cap chapter, how to deal with mid-market companies, is quite fascinating. A friend of ours is a guy called Robert Goldberg. He was the first business executive at Zynga. And he's done something really fascinating over the last couple of years. He goes into a mid-cap company that's plateaued. Its sales have kind of stabilized, and it's not scaling at the same way. And he basically says to them, we're going to implement 4 out of these 10 attributes, and let's see if we can double your growth rate in a quarter. Right? And if he's able to double the growth rate in a quarter working with the management team, then the ingredients are there, the management team is willing, the company's lined up. He makes an investment and then they try and take it 10x, 100x. Over the last 2 years, Robert has done this with 40 companies. With 40 companies, he's gone and doubled the growth rate in a quarter and then taken it 10x after that. Quite incredible. So it shows that you can actually apply these techniques quite effectively to an existing organization. But really large organizations are the really big question mark. And so I've run through some steps as to what do you do with an existing organization, okay? Now large for me is like 200 people and up, so that qualifies for most of you. First is your leadership has to be aware that this extraordinary transformation is taking place. Much of what you're learning from Peter and at Singularity about these technologies is a route to that. Number 2, and maybe the most dramatic exclamation point I have in this overall work is you cannot take an existing organization and turn it into one of these new animals. What you do is you leave your existing organization the way it is. It's too disruptive to say, let's completely change the organization into this new thing. What you can do is find the disruptive change makers in your organization. All of you have in your organizations, or either you are the disruptive change maker, or you have super loyal, very bright, very hard to manage people that have great ideas, take them to the edge of the organization and let them build one of these at the edge of the organization. If you look at Apple, I would argue, it's the biggest company and the most valuable company in the world today. It is not a design firm. It is not really a technology firm. It's a design capability with a technology supply chain. Apple's core innovation is an organizational one. The single thing that Apple does that no other big company does effectively is they have their core capabilities, they take a small disruptive team, take them to the edge of the organization, keep them completely stealth, and they say, go attack another industry. It started off with music, and then mobile phones, and then tablets, and now payments, which is a bit of a mother lode if they can crack that one. And that's all they do. And so we think big companies and existing organizations, this is a very interesting strategic path. Take your core capabilities, figure out how you can knock off and attack some other industry and go down that path. And Apple has built the most powerful company in the world that way. Third, you cannot, there's so many startups, disruptive startups operating near you, you have to find them and partner with them and invest in them, steal from them, whatever. Find the disruptive startups in your environment and figure out how to juxtapose with this. GE looked at Quirky and said, there's no way we can compete with that. And they invested in them and partnered with them. They've opened up their entire patent portfolio to Quirky investors and inventors. Fourth is leverage the data in your organizations. All of you have incredibly rich data sets that really aren't being mined. And Jeremy Howard will give you some hints around that. Fifth one is interesting. We're in a world where either you are the disruptor or you're the disrupted, right? Pretty much we're in that world. So before somebody else disrupts you, go hire a small team of 20-somethings. Tell them, I'm going to pay you to start an organization, and your job is to attack us. The design firm IDEO did this. They actually found their methodology was open sourced enough, and people knew it enough. They were losing their competitive edge. They literally hired a team and said, go disrupt us. The result was a platform called OpenIDEO, which is a design marketplace of ideas. And they're learning how to juxtapose with that. And the last one is set up an equivalent to the Google X environment where you take your core organization, you add the labs environment at the edge, add moonshots to it, which is another flavor of saying build EXOs at the edge of your organization and then build it out from there. And so those are the recommendations we have for a large organization. It's utterly critical for existing organizations that we do this and you do this to deal with this new world. And we're finding big companies doing some really interesting things. I mentioned Valve Software. In our research, we came across ING Direct, which is an online bank in Canada. Banks in Canada are extremely regulated, right? This bank has no CEO, no reporting lines, no job descriptions, no meetings, no management layers. Okay? It's called Tangerine now, but it's still operating in the same way. But the subsidiary is now called Tangerine. I actually went and spent some time with Peter Aceto, the CEO. They have 4 times as many deposits per employee than any of their competitors and 7 times more customer accounts per employee than any of the other banks, right? Extraordinary what they've been able to do. But you have to start the organization with this concept in mind. Amazon has done something really interesting. Amazon has created what they call the institutional yes. As I mentioned, our org structures are built to withstand change, and it's really easy in a big company to say no to an idea, right? All of the departments and layers will find reasons to say no to a particular idea because they want to keep doing the status quo. At Amazon, they've put in this idea called the institutional yes. I was talking to Werner Vogels, the CTO, about this a few days ago. In Amazon, if you come to me with a great idea, my default answer has to be yes. If I want to say no, I have to write a 2-page thesis as to why it's a bad idea and post it publicly inside the company. So they've created friction and embarrassment to saying no, which means that many more ideas get tested, tried, attempted, etc. Amazon Web Services was one of the results of this. Nobody could figure out a way of saying no to this damn thing, and they've created one of the most valuable properties in the world as a result. I won't go through all of them, but essentially fascinating. We're seeing big companies do some very active things around this. But a few takeaways. First, if you have experts in your organization, they will typically tell you how something cannot be done, right? And one of Peter's favorite quotes. Second, do not own your own assets, rent them, lease them, leverage them. Same with people. As we turn everything into information, everything is knowable and measurable. And you have the diagnostic to keep you on track as to where where this goes. David Rose summarized this really well. He made this comment that any company designed for success in the 20th century is doomed to failure in the 21st century. In the same way that we're hitting an inflection point in all of these technologies and all of these, how we're scaling this and turning the world into information, we're now doing the same thing with our organization structures. My favorite analogy for this paradigm is photography. We went from film photography, a material-based environment operating off a scarcity model, right, where it costs $1 a photograph. You can only carry so much film around. We take courses in photography, so we optimize every shot. And you shift the substrate to a digital environment and an information-based environment. And in the digital photography world, we now have 1,000 photographs. We now have 10 copies of all our photographs on 10 different devices, and we simply can't find the good stuff. Right? We've changed the problem space from a scarcity problem space to an abundance problem space. And as we turn more and more domains from a material world to an information world, we change the problem space. And the old paradigm of the problem that a business used to try and solve is not the same problem that the new paradigm has. And this is why big companies have to adapt very aggressively, otherwise they risk getting out of business. This is from the epilogue of the book. We picked the top sort of 10 exponential organizations, and the column here is the market cap from the beginning of starting to write the book to the end of the book. And you can see the market cap in 10 quarters, how fast these things are scaling, right? Uber is now 40 billion, so my chart from 2 months ago is out of date. One of the nightmares we had when writing this book, I would write up this huge narrative about Waze or something, and 6 months later, everything had changed. I had to spiral my way through the book, rewriting everything. And so we're seeing this extraordinary update in market cap and scalability of these organizations in a way that we've never seen before. We are completely living in a new world now. And it means that anybody can pick up some of these exponential technologies, grab an MTP, and go attack a completely new space. How many of you are familiar with the company Soylent? Can I just see a show of hands? A few of you, right? So I'm going to just mention Soylent for a second. It's a really great example of this. Soylent is a 25-year-old developer in New York City, Rob Reinhart, gets pissed off because he has to stop coding to go eat, right? Typical developer, right? And a friend of his is doing bodybuilding and drinking protein shakes to build muscle mass. And he says, why can't I have a shake like that that has the full complement of nutrients, vitamins, minerals, etc.? And it doesn't exist. So he spent 4 months with bionutritionists and chemists and so on and came up with the exact complement of what a human being needs, carbs, fats, etc., and turned it into a shake called Soylent. And essentially, people are now living on this and not eating any food, and they've lost a ton of weight, they're way healthier, etc., etc. Now, this threatens every major big food business, right? And they will never see it coming. They simply don't have, most big companies think their competition comes from other big companies. But today, their competition comes from guys like this, and people like you, who will take up some of these ideas and build it out. So, from a year ago, things are going really, really fascinatingly well. I mentioned Apple. We're kind of taking the diagnostic. I'm actually talking to a couple of public funds about taking the EXO diagnostic and measuring the scalability of public companies. And if we're correct, the scalability of the org structure of the public company will reflect stock value over time. And so it might be an interesting hedge fund play around that. So with that, thank you again, Peter, for having me. I think we have some time for Q&A. It's been great to be here.
Great. So let's go and have some Q&A. But let me give you context again for what we're doing here, and I'll make sure that I really want to serve all of you by having the survey results. We collected a lot of data. I know there were some difficulties. I think what we'll probably do is have this survey taken and also get your top 3 attributes, and I'll work with you over the next couple of weeks for you to take the 10 minutes and do that survey again. My goal is to find out exactly which of these 10 elements, the internal and external attributes, you want more focus on. And I just don't feel like the data coming back from the survey was sufficient in terms of the number of answers to get that. We're living in a time again where there is some new animal that is evolving, right? These exponential organizations are behaving differently. And I think we're just at the beginning, the knee of that curve. And the work that Salim has done, my pleasure to be a thought partner and to develop this with him, is sort of, again, over the horizon radar of how you should start thinking about it. And if you look at all these attributes, it's about making a company frictionless. It's about making a company more agile, because as the rate of change is going faster and faster and faster, you might have heard me say that at Singularity University, I had on stage about a year ago, I had on stage two amazing people, Astro Teller, who runs Google X, and a guy, Steve Jurvetson, who is the top VC in the Valley, as I'm concerned, in tech. And we're on stage, we're talking about innovation product cycles, and the concept that we're going from inventing new products every 2 or 3 years to inventing a new product version every year to inventing a new product cycle every couple of months. And so as this rate of change is getting faster and faster, agility is the #1 attribute. And so what we're seeing in these exponential organizations is agility. And if you're a large bricks and mortar company and you say, well, I can't be agile like that, there is a way for you to be agile. There is a way for you to be agile, to be thinking about how your employees or customers are helping you create the products, or how you take what you're doing online. And so my goal here through Salim is for you guys to get a sense of the elements you should be thinking about. Is that fair? So let's get about 10, 15 minutes of Q&A. Also, very luckily, the storms in the Northeast have canceled Salim's flight out today, so he's here with us through the day. All right, so we have microphones up around. Our first question, Mel.
Yes. On competitions and crowdsourcing, how can we assure our partners that there won't be the repercussions of people coming and trying to take their ideas back? So I run a company, we do robotics for mining and agriculture and material handling, those kinds of things. And if we open it up and crowdsource a better algorithm for navigating without GPS, and like we've done with crowdsourcing our logos or something like that, can we legally protect ourselves enough that a billion-dollar company we provide technology for is not going to be afraid that that inventor who came up with that brilliant idea isn't going to come back and say, hey, you're on thousands of mining trucks around the world, we're coming after you for the rights for my brilliant idea. Okay.
Peter, do you want to handle how you handle IP at Express?
Well, so listen, incentive competitions have different legal structures. Where's Christian Cottacini? Are you in the room? Christian, are you here? Okay, Christian is here during the next couple of days, but Christian's the CEO of HeroX, which is sort of a platform spin-out of XPRIZE, where you can select, do you want to have a competition where the data is owned by you? Is it open source to the community, or is it sourced to the crowd? And honestly, what I've learned, and especially it's a truism in Silicon Valley, and it's true, most people in the world actually sort of hoard their information and are protective of it. Silicon Valley is much more about, I want to share my ideas and bounce it off someone so I can get the improvement. And it's very unlikely that someone's going to steal your idea. I guarantee you, if the guys at Uber were sharing their ideas with people, the chance that someone's going to take that idea and implement it as fast as they would have, these guys or you or anybody here, it's your MTP, you're passionate about it. It's not the idea, it's the execution of the idea that matters. Ideas are a dime a dozen. In the world of this 3 to 5 billion people coming online, unless it's like a algorithm that is magical, and even then it's your data that matters even as much as the algorithm does.
Yeah. One of the challenges I've had is that these multi-billion-dollar companies value the IP, and they must have those IP trading cards against lawsuits against the Cat versus John Deere.
So I would create a subsidiary and run the contest out of there.
Okay.
Just keep the lawyers away. Not that they're bad. It's just not that they're bad. It's just the incentives are misaligned. It's the same thing. If you have an innovation unit or incubator and you have it report to the CFO, you're dead. Because the incentives aren't aligned around that, right?
All right,
and
so who would you suggest I talk to about getting the legal structure right that would keep us protected?
Talk to a lawyer. No, I'm just kidding. What you do, you can very effectively create a subsidiary and run that through there, and then make sure that the contestants own their own IP, or it's a shared resource and so on. We've seen lots of different models around this. In one case, we've seen a contest where they said, we're going to, whatever ideas come up, we're going to take 20%, give those to the winners, and then the rest of them share, the rest of the finalists share some of that benefit because they've contributed their ideas to it. The other one is just open source everything. The Soylent guy that I just mentioned, once he got a bit of traction, he open sourced his formula. Essentially, we think about this, John Hagel put this very well. We used to operate in a world of stocks of knowledge, stocks of intellectual property, stocks of goods. Now we operate in a world of flows. And so the flow of ideas is much more important than owning it itself. So that means you have to convince your legal folks that that's what should happen.
I'm guessing my legal folks haven't ever done a competition document.
Probably not.
Any recommended firms that have done those kinds of things?
I mean,
over there.
Yeah.
Orange shirt, got it.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Brian. Microphone on the right, please.
It's on.
Hey, okay. So we've tried to ramp up our experimentation over the last year. And as we get into experiments that are more what I'd call kind of revenue facing, we face this question of what metrics should we look for instead of trying to predict, oh, this could be, you know, a 10 million or 50 or $100 million idea when it's really, really tiny. What should you be looking for at the first or second experiment stage to tell you if you've got something on your hands?
Two things. First, does it match with your MTP?
Yep.
Right, that's the one. And assuming that it does, the second one is the customer engagement and feedback loops. So if you look at, Reid Hoffman made this famous quote that if you're not embarrassed by your product when you launch it, you've waited too long, right? And the idea, and you see this with Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Foursquare, the first launch was actually pretty crappy. The information architecture wasn't well designed, et cetera. But what they were trying to do is get a minimum viable product out there and start user engagement, and then the way that the users use the product or service then drives the feature development and product development going forward.
Right. So you want to see that ramping up?
Yeah, so what you do is
somehow.
you pick, if you have, say, 20 features in your idea, you pick the 2 that you think will succeed, just launch those 2, get engagement around that, and then start adding more and more.
And I write about in bold in part 2 of the book, which is Bold Mindset. There's an extensive conversation with Astro Teller at Google X. One of the things I find amazing is when they start a company or acquire a company, they set very concrete measures about how fast that company needs to grow and what it needs to achieve in a certain period of time. And if it doesn't achieve it, they kill it. And they'll spend their resources, or they'll park it, or they don't sell companies. They've exited one company, I think, in the last 10 years. But they'll either store it, put it on ice, or they'll kill it. And it's being clear about being a very data-driven organization. This is the metric. We do achieve it. You let your emotions out of it.
Right. And in the book, do you talk about how to set those targets? You know,
It varies too much from industry
Okay.
to industry and market to market.
yeah, so you have to make a call.
Christian Cottaccini, CEO of HeroX, you want to answer his question?
Yes.
Or you have a question to ask?
Can you repeat the question?
There's a question over there. Why don't you guys take it offline in
Yeah.
case there's
Okay.
his question was, how do you run incentive competitions with the right legal framework and structure?
Oh, okay. That's the 10-minute version is. No, I'm going to be here. We're presenting tomorrow, I think at 5:15. So you'll get a little snapshot of the amazing progress we've made on the HeroX platform. And I'll be here. So if you're interested in incentive competitions, let me know, and I'll be happy to
But
talk
just,
to you about it.
there's, again, my goal is always, whether it's with Kickstarter or Indiegogo or HeroX or Xperify, is turnkey platforms that you guys can use. And for incentive competitions, gamification, HeroX is one of them.
Okay.
Other questions, please?
Any other questions?
Okay.
Question over there? Wait, there's a question
there's-
over there.
Okay, please.
Hi, Celine. My name's Robin Todd. I'm from Canada. And based on my MTP, I have one critical question for my moonshot. Will you marry me?
My wife might have something to say about that. Although, as it came down towards the end of the book, it was either the book gets out or she gets out. It was kind of a close call there. So, but for now, I'm taken. So, thank you for that.
All right, another
All right.
round of applause for Salim Ismail.
All right, thank you very much.
I'm jealous. I didn't get any wedding proposals. God. All right. Oh, Joe, that's true. That's true. It was just an affirmation of love. So let's talk about some top takeaways here. So today's exponential organizational startups are being built differently than companies 20 years ago. I mean, for me, that fundamental understanding that is important. So if you're a company that's 20 years old and you haven't changed, I think it's really important for you to look, deeply. You own customer relationships, you own market brand share, you own positioning and so forth. But if you stand still, competing is a very difficult thing. Number two, you can implement an EXO upgrade, but it needs to be done step by step. So again, these 10 attributes that we saw, your goal is not to become an expert in all of them, in dashboards, in gamification, in off balance sheet employees. And your goal is to pick a couple, 2 or 3 each year, and focus. And so through our monthly webinars, we're going to be actually taking the time to go over these and spend time and give you on-ramps to them. Okay, you want to show the data? Go ahead. Put the data up on the board. So these were the top 3: staff on demand, crowd and community, and engagement in the crowd. So all on the externalities. Staff on demand. This is your votes of what you guys wanted to focus on more. I'm going to actually do this survey again because I want to double check the results. But my goal is to spend time giving you the tools to actually begin to utilize these. So it was S, C, and E out of scale that got the top 10 results. 125 votes, 110, but we'll come back to that. All right, come back to the slides if you would. Number 3, if you're thinking about starting a company now, please, I know that for myself, my company PhD Ventures that runs Abundance 360, it's a small team of 6 individuals, average age 24, and they really run as an autonomous organization. We try and implement all of these things. And it's, so if you're starting a company now, how can you start an exponential organization?